Toxic positivity enabling is dangerous. It is systemic and it is everywhere. Someone invalidating you is not your fault. No, it's not because your energy is off. It's just not okay. Someone gaslighting you is not your fault. You feeling sad if someone is conducting themselves this way with you is normal. A very common trope that arises in a narcissistic relationship, sort of a storyline of these narcissistic relationship, is the story of the empath and the narcissist. The empath is the benefit of the doubt rescuer. Everyone has good in them. Let's give them a second chance. We can make this work. I understand their point of view. I can feel their feelings kind of lover. The narcissist is the one-way street taker. And in the blink of an eye, you put a narcissist and an empath together, and you're watching a very toxic tango. So the question becomes, when does this never-ending, bottomless well of empathy that the empath offers go from empathy to enabling? And is there a difference between empathy and enabling? Let's break this down by starting to talk about empathy. We talk about empathy all the time, right? But really, what is it? I view it as empathy as being the awareness of, interest in, and presence with the emotional states of another person in a way that results in some kind of behavioral shift in us. And that behavioral shift might mean we listen to someone, we help someone, or we otherwise respond to that other person in a way that's consistent with understanding their feelings. Part B of empathy is something we call self-reflective capacity. That ability to be aware of your own impact on other people, to infer how other people may experience you, and shape or modify your behavior accordingly based on the temperature of the room, or at least the other person in the room with you. To empathize is to genuinely attempt to put yourself in the position or the mindset of the other person. The Oxford Dictionary defines empathy as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. As you can see, my definition was a little bit talky. But at the core of empathy is the ability to resonate, care about, and pay attention to the feelings of other people, which in essence really just means being tapped into other people and caring about them. Empathy is good for us, and it's good for the world. When people feel seen and heard, they thrive. Too many people did not get consistent empathy when they needed it most, which was in childhood. And so they often crave it as adults, and they blossom in the presence of it. Now, I don't want this to devolve into a dissertation, which I could for hours, on how the world has become much more selfish, much more egocentric, and let's face it, technology is a big player in that. Listen, there was a time in history that empathy was a little bit more required just to get through the day. We human beings lived in small tribal structures, and we relied on each other for gathering and hunting and farming and trading and child rearing. I have no doubt those early tribes squabbled and fought a lot, but they had to be attuned to each other. Empathy as a survival trait seems to have lost some of its adaptive utility. And the fact is, though, that is harming everyone's mental health. So then what is enabling? Enabling is permitting or even sort of facilitating the maladaptive or unhealthy behavior of another person by not putting any consequences on their behavior and going one step farther and even taking responsibility for another person's behavior. And the overall outcome of all of this is that it sort of strengthens and reinforces the bad behavior and the person behaving badly, where change is no longer likely or possible. The Oxford definition of enabling, interestingly, is to give the authority or means to do something. It's a little simple, right? In psychology, and actually this term really came up from the addiction literature, this term enabling really implied allowing drinking or drug use to be silently or quite literally supported, either because of fear or at some level to maintain control of the addict, or to create a universe of shared dysfunction where everyone was kind of keeping each other down so nobody could leave the system, right? So when does empathy become enabling? It's a very, very tricky question, one I grappled with for a while, especially when it comes to narcissism. The challenge with empathy is that it works best, obviously, when it's a two-way street. For it to be a one-way street, for empathy to be a one-way street, the way it is with a narcissistic relationship, is really the equivalent on playing on a seesaw or a teeter-totter alone. However, empathy is really good and important for us to show, but we also need to be aware when our empathy is not being reciprocated in any way. It's actually really hard clinically to work with people on how do you keep your own empathy intact when it is not being reciprocated, especially in a primary relationship. But then to not try to rescue or teach the person who's not reciprocating. A lot of empaths believe that if you show another person enough empathy, including a narcissist, that they're going to come around, that the love will make them blossom, like a whole Beauty and the Beast thing. It doesn't work that way. Now, empathy becomes enabling when it becomes a major driver of those justifications we make. The empathy becomes the fuel for the justification. Things like, well, we really need to understand someone else's perspective, and everyone deserves a chance, and I can also see their point of view. In fact, understanding someone else's perspective is great, and it's healthy. It starts to become a problem when you do it and they don't. And that means that their behavior goes unaddressed. Empathy becomes actually a piece of this whole cognitive dissonance framework. The narcissist does a bad thing. We are in a relationship with that narcissist. We don't want conflict. We don't want to call them out. And then we use an empathy-based excuse to let them off the hook. Like, everyone deserves a chance, or I just need to work harder on being more loving towards them. What that does, though, is it breaks the dissonance, and then you avoid conflict, or you avoid the battle, or you avoid having to address it, and you get to maintain the status quo. Many people who are highly empathic are conflict averse. Conflict and fighting might have been unsettling from childhood. It may be related to histories of trauma. It may even be a sort of a fear of abandonment. But being afraid of conflict is also another key driver of enabling, particularly with narcissists who are so vindictive and conflictual. When people keep knitting second chances out of empathy, this idea of everyone deserves a chance, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. When people keep excluding bad behavior from this place of empathy, they didn't mean it, I understand why they did that. When we don't issue meaningful consequences on bad behavior, something like, I know lying or cheating is not okay, but aren't all of us human? Then we enable behavior. One could argue that maybe we aren't that different. We human beings are not that different from rats in mazes. Our behavior is shaped by the consequences that follow it. If the narcissist acts like an ass and you are still there just loving them up, why would they change their behavior? That empathy turns into enabling. I firmly believe that highly empathic people do not have to be enablers. Empathy is magnificent. It means empathizing with emotion. You can even empathize with a person's difficult life history and even understand how it could lead to bad behavior in the present time. You can also then say, yep, I get it, and your behavior is not acceptable. And you can set a boundary against it. Empathy starts getting confusing when it gets mixed up with our own neurotic struggles, our fear of abandonment, our fear of conflict, our fear of letting other people down, our fear of expressing our needs. Then we just sort of fall back on the virtue of empathy. I'm going to understand their point of view, instead of facing our own stuff as well. Enabling is why narcissistic relationships can actually literally last for lifetimes. And empathy can often be a bigger driver of that than you would think. Like I told you, I'm a huge fan of empathy. I believe it's a game changer and a life need, and it makes the world healthier. But I also believe that we need to understand that a person can be empathic and still issue meaningful behavioral consequences. A person can still set boundaries. A person can still disengage. The sad fact is that too much empathy gets wasted on trying to win people over, on the people who don't see it or don't get it. It's a bit like just letting a faucet run and they don't take advantage of it. And interestingly, the people who actually would benefit from the empathy often go thirsty because we're wasting it. Maybe it is that early life conflict of trying to win over and master over that unwinnable parent and get them to notice us that leads us to this. Another difficult issue is that, yes, many people who are narcissistic, yes, I understand they do have very difficult life histories at times. Trauma, loss, cold and remote parents, chaotic beginnings. And we want to show people like that empathy. And that's great. But again, the manipulation, which is at the core of narcissistic relationships, means that a narcissistic person will very quickly recognize that your empathy is the equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is for this reason that forgiveness is such a challenging space in narcissistic relationships. Forgiveness, the act of forgiveness, is very much predicated on empathy. But with a narcissist, that forgiveness is enabling. While with those who are narcissistic, who are not narcissistic, so when you're with somebody who's not narcissistic, forgiveness can be redemptive and transformative. When it comes to forgiveness, you got to know your audience. It's a complex relationship between empathy and enabling. And sadly, people will often cite empathy as a reason for not setting boundaries or consequences. That seems a little hard on them, right? Acknowledging your own discomfort with setting boundaries is a first step. And perhaps the greatest challenge with empathy is that we show so little of it to ourselves. And frankly, if you can be empathic with yourself, you are not only going to be far better at bringing it to the world, you are also less likely to be an enabler. So to all the empaths out there, stop giving it away. It's time you started showing some of that empathy to yourselves. Don't blame yourselves, but recognize that boundaries are a really good thing, especially with narcissists. And the biggest takeaway, when we enable bad behavior in narcissists, it's just a matter of time before that enabled narcissistic person goes out and hurts somebody else. I really want to reiterate the point. Empathy is great. And before you all feel like you need to downregulate it, I'm saying that you can be wise and discerning with your empathy. You can feel it for someone, but empathy doesn't mean caving. Empathy doesn't mean enabling. Empathy means often seeing someone struggle and getting someone struggle and doing that really, really hard action of setting a line and setting a boundary. In many ways, that actually conforms to what has sometimes been called tough love, right? I get it. I love them. But if I keep this cycle going, this person is not only going to destroy us, they may very well destroy themselves. So please understand that your empathy is great. It's a necessary tool to get through the world. It's good for you. Just be careful that it doesn't become part of a larger structure of justification. Oh, the enablers, the enablers, the enablers. I'm on a bit of a tear on the enablers these days. With each passing day, well, I definitely obviously see that narcissism is a core issue in our world, and I see how much people are struggling with this. Part of what gives the narcissistic people their power is the enablers. The people who, for reasons in themselves that are both selfish and naive, ignorant and hopeful, choose or simply can't see the narcissism in their midst. The enablers are often more harmful with their gaslighting. Once you understand narcissism, it makes sense. You see their charm and charisma, their shape-shifting and their lies, their betrayal and their blame-shifting. It's clear, and you see it. The enablers, though, are a whole other story because they take so many forms. And we have videos on this channel talking about all the different kinds of enablers and enabling. I mean, we know that some are naive Pollyannas. Some of them are sort of in collusion with the narcissistic person. They get benefits from the narcissistic person, such as money or some other forms of support. Some enablers just want to preserve something bigger. They're wedded to the idea of family or marriage or something, and they don't want to see anything that interferes with that vision. To see or believe or accept your version of events through the lens of narcissism means dismantling their version of the world. So it's easier to write off the person who's being abused by the narcissist as being the problem or being too sensitive or being too dramatic. Then the enabler gets to preserve their worldview. That's cognitive dissonance at play. They throw you under the bus so they can keep reviewing the world the way they want. But there's another way this plays out, when we enable the enablers. And sometimes we view the enablers, the people who don't get it, who think you're being too harsh when you say you're going no contact, for example, with a family member, or you're getting a divorce after 40 years, or you refuse to attend a family wedding and engage with a toxic sibling, or stop spending time with a friend group because of one friend's invalidating and manipulative behavior. We view some of these enablers as kind and nice. So we may think this enabler, who we have known for a long time and who is kind, oh, she's so sweet and she believes in family. Oh, he's such a kind, great guy. It's hard for him to think that people are toxic. Or she's so nice. He's so kind. They're so sweet. It's not in their nature to see this. You know what, folks? Fuck that. When a person can't hear that someone is suffering in a toxic relationship and writes revisionist BS around it. Family is important. Family first. Marriage is forever. Give him, give her, give them another chance. You only have one family. You only have one mother. That's not kind. This is difficult when the person engaging in this enabling actually is a nice, kind person. This is why enabling can be so confusing. When the enabler actually is sweet and nice and doesn't have a harsh word for anyone and is deeply empathic and sweet and compassionate and all that good stuff, and you've seen it and you know it, it may in some ways be experienced by us as the harshest form of enabling of all. And we may start to believe that they are indeed too kind or sweet or nice, and that is why they don't see it. Because this is a mind F. I gotta stop cursing. We see a kind and sweet person who is questioning a painful decision or awareness that we are coming to, that a longtime spouse or partner or family member or friend is narcissistic, and that we may have to step away from the relationship. And so we again then step back and wonder if we're the ones who are being excessive. Nobody comes to the decision to step away from a narcissistic relationship lightly. These relationships are confusing by definition. These are charming, charismatic, sympathetic at times, confusingly empathic at others, sometimes nice, often manipulative, always self-serving people. And we get confused. We read and hear things on the news about people who are physically assaulted and abused by family members, by partners, and we may think, well, that's not what I'm going through. I'm just living with someone where it is unpredictable. And I feel like I'm not enough. And maybe that's a me thing. And even if it levels up, the spouse cheats, the parents betray your trust, the family member takes your money or takes advantage of you, you may still get confused by the mix of emotions and behavior that they show. So, when someone whom you value as kind and nice and sweet and solid says, you only have one mom, Or do you want to do this to your kids? Or there's always a way to work things out, give them a chance. It kind of takes our trauma bond and encases it in cement. If our sweet friend sees it this way, maybe we're wrong. I do not for a minute buy that a person cannot see narcissism clearly and also be kind. I think you can be kind and simultaneously get it. In fact, most of you who have weathered long-term narcissistic relationships and had to take some drastic actions are some of the kindest people out there. You put up with so much, and many of you never played dirty. You never let the narcissistic person really have it, and you still showed up like a decent human being. Seeing something clearly doesn't make you unkind. It makes you wise. And frankly, it makes you more compassionate. Because the ultimate measure of kindness is to be in the uncomfortable position of being able to remain witness to another person's pain and to not judge it, but just be with it. Honestly, it's easy to be kind if you have the luxury of walking around in a world where ideals like family is good, or maybe your life wasn't harmed by narcissism. I'd be a damned saint too under those circumstances. But that's not how life works. And every so often I meet that unicorn of a person who says that, no, I never really had any major narcissistic people in their lives, at which point I do look at them suspiciously and wonder, is it them? But the idea that some people just don't get it because they're kind or sweet or nice, I'm not buying it. You cannot live in the world the way it is now and not get it. And if you don't get it, you are putting yourself and other people at risk. Getting it means protecting yourself. It means understanding the dynamics. It means not getting pulled into the toxic dance, not sharing too much of yourself, not blaming yourself, not getting snowed by qualities like confidence and smarts or financial success, which make us think a person is good. Which actually those qualities don't mean a person is good. It means that they're smart or successful. Getting it is empathic. It may not have happened to you, or it did and you choose not to see it, but getting it means then that you can be there for others in a non-judgmental way. I'm happy for people with happy families and marriages. Great, go enjoy them, but it is not kind if you don't understand it and then you second guess the agonizing decisions that someone who has gone through a narcissistic relationship has to grapple with. Just because you didn't or don't want to see it, or you want to maintain some sort of idealized, utopic, unsullied vision of the world. Is it really kindness if a person can witness your pain and second guess it? Not really. And because a sweet person does this, we may doubt ourselves and dig deeper into the sense that we are the bad ones. After all, the sweet person is saying that we should give the narcissistic person another chance, and love is great. So maybe we're the devilish person for wanting to go no contact and never look back. You aren't the devilish person. In fact, your desire to potentially go no contact or distance from a narcissistic person, or maybe even never interact with them again, is self-kindness. And frankly, it's often clear-headed sanity. It's not a choice. Going no contact, for example, is not a choice all of us can make. But many a kind friend may even look at you sideways for even suggesting that dear old dad or your bossy sister is narcissistic or toxic. So let's stop doing the enabler's dirty work for them. They may choose not to see what is going on, but we don't need to let them magnify our self-doubt. The enablers are the jet fuel for the narcissistic people. They are their armies of flying monkeys and manipulators, and yes, sometimes they are nice people. Until they enable. And then, they are part of the problem. And despite all of that kindness, they may be bad for your health. So let's take on something that a lot of people say,
I don't want to raise a narcissistic kid, or I don't want my kids to ever get the message that narcissism is okay. So I'm going to talk about something really controversial today, right? And I have a feeling the comments might get a little bit ugly on this one, but I really, really want to take offense with when we tell children that you must respect your elders. I'm going to talk about how that stance, respect your elders, can actually contribute to a likelihood of making your kids more likely to actually be vulnerable to narcissists as they get older. So what am I saying? So let's take that apart. So let's face it, a lot of us grew up with this saying, respect your elders, right? And I get messages from people all the time, lots of people asking me, what are some ways that we can help address narcissistic abuse and protect our children from it as they get older? Most of the time, people are asking me about how to protect their children from a narcissistic co-parent or something like that. But we also need to be careful that we are not unwittingly enabling patterns that are not good for our children. We may mean well. We may be carrying cultural and familial traditions, and this simple statement, especially in families that have been impacted by intergenerational narcissism and narcissistic abuse, can actually do far more harm than good. Respect your elders. So this is really challenging because please, and again, this is what I'm saying, people might get heated. Please do not take this as me saying that young people or anyone should disrespect their elders. But I am a bigger fan of according people with respect and also expecting respect back. But when families say respect your elders, they are going one step more. What they're doing is they're telling people to not question your elders, to respect them unseeingly, and sometimes to endure bad behavior from those elders, to give those elders a free pass. And that, depending on how the elders conduct themselves, is risky. Respect to me is a quality that should characterize all human relationships, but it is also something that over time is something that can be lost based on someone's conduct. It needs to be cultivated through our behavior. It should not just be a given that because someone is older, that they can constantly be given a free pass. In a lot of the familial narcissistic abuse out there, respect your elders is code for don't stand up for your, don't ever stand up for yourself. Don't ever question them, despite that so-called elder supporting or being toxic family members. Don't feel that you could set a boundary around them. Do not say something to them that is ever critical in any way. Do not protect other family members in the system. There's a lot that's encoded in respect your elders. Respect your elders becomes a hidden way of saying, do not question this family system, no matter how broken and toxic it is. The issue then becomes that in some systems, these so-called elders have lots of power to maintain the toxic structures, and others in the system have to keep showing deference and respect to them despite the harm that they may have caused or the harm that they are enabling. Many times, the most toxic folks in a family system will harness an elder in the name of shaming people in the family system who actually try to stand up to the toxic system. The elder may be wedded to that collective structure. It's working for them. And the toxic family member will then call out someone who is trying to set boundaries around them and say, oh, you're not respecting the family. And as such, that means you're not respecting the elder in the system. Because if an elder is requiring blind commitment to an abusive or toxic family system, or signing off on an abusive family member's behavior, or are they themselves abusive, then respect your elders really means you better keep enabling. And if you don't, we will shame you for shattering a societal requirement of elder respect, and the narcissistic abuse in the family system can persist. Now, the power of elders in family systems is significant, especially when we are talking about cultural or generational narcissism. I have to be honest, in some family systems that I have witnessed and worked with, that the only way some really damaging generational cycles end is when the entire family system dies out because people don't have kids, or when a subset of the family goes no contact and maybe raises their children away from the original toxic system. Otherwise, the respect your elders, don't question them, keep enabling everyone mantras can result in multiple generations being harmed by and perpetuating these cycles of toxic family narcissistic abuse. In many cultures, respecting elders is just accorded without question, without consideration of whether this elder's behavior is consistent with that which should be respected. And the elder respect piece has a twist that if anyone were to break ranks and say that I don't respect this older person in my family, in this family system, that because they harmed my parent, because they harmed other people, because they harmed me, that they keep supporting someone who's harming people in the family, then that family member who stands up against that elder and sets a boundary around that elder is often shamed and shut down. So many people don't even want to do that or take that risk. The traditionalism and orthodoxy about families always have to stick together. Blood is always thicker than water. Respect your elders, honor their mother and father, runs a risk of becoming enabling spaces and perpetuation of toxic cycles and sort of a petri dish for family narcissistic abuse, because it means that unless a person makes the major step of setting boundaries and leaving, they are often stuck in a toxic structure and a toxic culture, family culture, with an elder who commands respect and is also enabling the most toxic people in the family system in the name of family. As parents are attempting to help children navigate an increasingly narcissistic world and often wondering, how can I stop these cycles in my family and protect my children? This is actually one of the harder things to sort of face down. Now, remember, this is not about telling your child to willfully disrespect elders. Never would it be okay for a child to be name calling or behaving rudely to anyone in the family. But this is about teaching a child that they do not need to fawn over someone or kiss their ring or do some sort of performative respect dance for an elder that may, for example, have been your abusive narcissistic parent, or is continuing to embolden or enable narcissistic players in your family system, perhaps a toxic sibling or aunt or uncle. You can teach your child to treat everyone with the same respect, but not that they have to show unearned deference to someone who has actually possibly harmed you and is still allowing a toxic family system to fester. Throughout history, narcissists have gotten their power because of archaic rules and hierarchies, and they capitalized on those. And they were allowed to sustain and maintain cultures and systems of abuse and invalidation just because. Respect your elders runs the risk of sometimes being one of those frameworks. And listen, folks, I'm about a block away from being an elder myself, and my body is telling me that I am already there. But nobody owes me any respect unless I earn it through how I conduct myself. If I ever do get to have grandchildren, they can respect me if I behave in a manner that accords respect, but not just because I am an elder. I am also the child of immigrant parents who went through their share of hardships. Some of those elders in our family system, either here or in the country where my parents immigrated from, they completely get my respect, morning, noon, and night, because their behavior warrants it. But others in that system continue to engage in brutally narcissistic behavior, and I still get the message that I'm supposed to respect those elders. I ignore that advice. I ignore them. And I have never told my children to do some sort of respect ritual with these narcissistic people in our family system. I tell my kids it's okay to set a boundary and disengage if they are witnessing toxic behavior, regardless of the age of the person doing it. To do differently would be sending a mixed message to my children. And I refused to perpetuate these cycles any more than they already have been in my family, at least. Mixed messages about respecting elders fosters cognitive dissonance, creates more confusion, and also creates more vulnerability to these relationships and cycles. Because basically, what we're doing is telling kids, push down all that bad stuff you're seeing, be okay with it, and even rally up and really, again, do that performative respect dance. And to do that, really, especially if this is somebody who may have harmed you in a family system, doesn't feel good for you. And it's giving a confusing message to your kids. Again, it's a very tough one. And it is not about willful disrespect. It's really, really about how can I teach my kids that respect at some level, while we should have it for everyone, it's also something that at times needs to be cultivated and at some level earned.
Now, toxic positivity is a pattern that is sort of seen in people who sort of require people to be happy and positive all the time, who don't allow space for normal, what we call dysphoric or negative emotions like anxiety or sadness or worry. And many a self-improvement cult has arisen out of people being told their dysphoric or sad emotions reflected some sort of damage or limitation within them, and then they would have those emotions be judged harshly by the other people in the so-called cult. Now, as a general rule, it is useful. Emotions are useful because there are messengers, right? And in most cases, maybe not all, but in most cases, emotions pass. We have them and then they work them their way through. But we need to heed our emotions as the messengers and signals that they are. And what we need to do is learn appropriate ways of being with our emotions and learning to respond in the face of them. Now, the toxic positivity folks are the ones who shame people for not walking around eternally optimistic. And they're fully convinced of their power all of the time. They will often invoke and weaponize all kinds of new age hooey to do this sort of shaming of negative emotions, and will tell you, none of that negative talk. Come on now, shift your mindset. You have the power of your mind. Set a happy intention. You are the master of your mind. And for people who are facing oppressive and dominant and abusive behavior, not just from a partner or a family member, but from the world at large, you can set all of the damned intentions and mind power you want. You can't change the world, and you shouldn't blame yourself for that. Because that's what ends up happening in this toxically positive space, that somehow your mind is so magical that it could change everything, including the other toxic people in it. So in the toxic positivity world, these are folks who don't like hearing about narcissism. It's just too negative for them. And it's interesting because a fair number of these toxically positive folks are narcissistic themselves. Narcissism feels like it's too defeatist a conversation for them. It feels too negative. And this idea that something can't change, well, that's just way too much for them. To them, you've got your mind power that should be able to change anything, right? In the toxic positivity world, everything can be changed, they think. And if you believe it can't be changed, well, that's your fault. Interestingly, the toxic positivity folks may also not be that bothered, as it were, at the kinds of narcissistic traits and qualities we see in people, and instead they may frame narcissistic people as people who are just tough leaders, or who think out of the box, or who are just able to make direct decisions. And that if we are having trouble in a relationship with them, then it's our fault. Please don't get me started on this. This one gets me going. This toxic positivity movement is actually observed, and we see it in a certain subset of motivational speakers, and basically anyone who basically tries to silence people who are trying to say, hey, Not everything is good. So those people like me who are saying not everything is good and we need to support people through it. No, 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 no. They don't want to hear that. Toxically positive enablers will also convert all of your emotions about other people into a projection. They'll say things to you like, well, you're angry at that person because you're just disappointed in yourself. And that can leave you with even more self-doubt, especially if that person you're angry at is a gaslighting, invalidating, narcissistic person. So, as you can imagine, the toxic positivity going through a narcissistic relationship enablers, and at times they are even re-traumatizing. If a person is going through a narcissistic relationship, the toxic positivity enabler will more often than not blame the person who is going through the narcissistic abuse, telling them things like, well, maybe you weren't clear-headed when you set that intention, or maybe you just aren't manifesting it the right way, or maybe you really don't want to be out of this relationship, or my favorite toxic positivity enabling sentence, maybe you like being treated like this. When I hear that stuff, I want to curse. The toxic positivity folks are the individual enablers. The toxic positivity movement means that there are entire systems that enable narcissism. I have had numerous people tell me that they have had everyone from so-called spiritual teachers to so-called healers to coaches to yoga teachers to energy healers to therapists tell them that instead of calling the relationship toxic or your partner narcissistic or toxic, look within you, because that is within your control, and ask yourself why you need to label it this way, and ask yourself what you are responsible for in this other person's behavior. They will also go on to say that, oh, come now, that's not nice. People aren't toxic, and that your negative feelings can be changed by shifting your mindset. Listen, you cannot look within yourself until you are educated about what is also it's outside of you, so you can make an informed decision. Let's, the positivity folks, leave that rather important bit out. Sure, so when a person's reality is being denied, or they are not being shown basic human empathy, or they are being invalidated, exactly how are they supposed to take responsibility and control? It's like blaming someone's face for being in the way of another person's fist. But this idea of personal responsibility to a fault, coupled with the unwillingness for so many Healy types to see narcissistic relationships clearly, means that many survivors walk around in a state of self-blame, self-shame, and self-gaslighting for years and even decades longer than they need to. The toxic positivity enabling is one of the major reasons why this entire issue of narcissism and what it does to other people isn't getting addressed systematically. Why positive, toxically positive motivational speakers make millions and millions of dollars and are embraced by the healing pundits who love nice and easy love and light solutions, with the rest of us who are trying to address narcissism and narcissistic abuse bringing up the rear without nearly as much reach. This message on narcissism is not as cheerful as being positive. I know that. Listen, I have no doubt that positivity is nice, and it must actually be fun. I am pessimistic by nature, and I think I was born that way, and it's in my DNA, so I own it. It's not my natural groove. I gotta tell you, sometimes I really love the reassurance that comes from positive people. And frankly, I really do believe in taking personal responsibility, especially once you have all of the facts. And that is why when people are being told to change themselves and look inward, when they are in a difficult relationship. I can get behind that, but only if they have all the facts. Facts including the idea that narcissism really doesn't change, that none of this is really your fault, that there's nothing you can do, and that you can't win at this. And once you know that, once you really get the parameters of what these antagonistic relationships are about, yep, then I can get behind a person having to take responsibility when they're in one of these relationships and making a decision. But blaming a person for being sad or anxious or confused when they're being narcissistically abused, that's BS. Toxic positivity enabling is dangerous. It is systemic and it is everywhere. Someone invalidating you is not your fault. No, it's not because your energy is off. It's just not okay. Someone gaslighting you is not your fault. You feeling sad if someone is conducting themselves this way with you is normal. And when someone tells you to turn that frown upside down because you're responsible for it, you can tell them in whatever way works for you where to put that advice. That frown of yours, I'm actually pretty confident it will work itself out. Once you understand what these relationships are about, and you can break through the cognitive dissonance and the trauma bonding. Nobody can rush your healing. There is no magical yoga pose or crystal or self-development course or a mantra that can do it. Get the information on what these toxic personality styles are about. Be kind to yourself and trust the process. It will happen. And while you are setting up the boundaries and the disengagement around the narcissistic folks, you may want to cast that net a little wider, and you may want to do that with the toxically positive enablers as well. The toxically positive enablers are actually a little bit different than the Pollyannas. The Pollyannas actually take a little bit more of a simplistic stance. Everybody has good in them. The toxically positive ones take this a level up. They actually blame you and want you to take responsibility for everything that happens to you, even the narcissistic abuse, and will blame you when you have a negative mood for not having a strong enough mind to get your way out of it. I actually do believe that there's a lot of space and utility to positivity, but I am not a fan of empty, inane, sort of jump on the train with everyone else positivity. I think that positivity has to come from a place of you understanding what these kinds of difficult relationships are about and ultimately feeling the freedom, the power, and the conviction to make decisions that work for you. Don't let anyone ever tell you to smile for them because it's good for you, and if you don't, it's because your energy's off. Your energy's right on. You just need the right information to make the best choice for you. Thanks again.